Mr. Buffett, any observations on the responses by Mr. McDaniel?
Well, I've probably been more draconian than you have in terms of my view about the CEO's responsibility and
I just haven't been as widely quoted.
well, in terms of financial institutions that have failed and have required assistance by the federal government, I think that when society has to step in to save institutions for societal reasons, that the CEO should basically go away broke, and I've said I think his spouse should go away broke. I mean, I think there ought to be a real downside, and I think incentives are an important aspect in behavior. In the end, you know, I don't know who, except for maybe John Paulson or Michael Burry, would have been running Moody's and coming up with different kinds of ratings. There was the greatest bubble I've ever seen in my life, and I've read about bubbles all the way back to the tulip bubble. The entire American public eventually was caught up in a belief that housing prices could not fall dramatically. And Freddie Mac believed it, Fannie Mae believed it, Congress believed it, the media believed it, I believed it. If I'd seen what was coming, would I have held my Moody's stock in the 60s or something of the sort? Very, very few people could appreciate the bubble, and that's the nature of bubbles. They become mass delusions of sorts. So I am much more inclined to come down hard on the CEOs of institutions that caused the United States government to come in and necessarily bolster them than I am on somebody that made a mistake that 300 million other Americans made.
Well, but let me probe that a little, because you know, I just want to say for the record, I do think around the country there were people who thought the bubble was unsustainable. I don't think there was a secret here. There were a number of experts, whether it was Robert Schiller or Mr. Rubini or Mr. Baker, Dean Baker. There were a number of people who saw this bubble. We did have this unprecedented rise, 89% in home price appreciation in 7 years, something we had never seen historically. But kind of, you know, moving beyond that for a minute, the rating agencies did play a fundamental role in accelerating essentially the securitization, and therefore some would argue the origination of products that tended to be highly deficient. We're talking about low teaser rates, negative amortization. There was a warning in 2004 from the FBI that mortgage fraud had become so epidemic that if unchecked, it would result in a crisis as big as the S&L crisis. I mean, there were many red and yellow flashing lights along the way. There is a country song by Don McLean where he says, when the gates are all down and the signals are flashing and the whistles are screaming in vain, and you stay on the tracks avoiding the facts, you can't blame the wreck on the train. Wasn't the role of the rating agencies, though, to be referees in a game that got out of control? You told our staff that, well, gee, if they had not done the ratings, they would have been howled at by Congress, but don't we expect referees to make the call, even if they're going to get booed?
Yeah, and they made the wrong call. I mean, they basically believed, as most of the American public did, and you couldn't have had this size bubble without overwhelming. And the Cassandras were there, but who was going to listen to John Paulson in 2005 or 2006 or Michael Burry? I mean, it didn't mean anything. And you know, and look at me. I mean, I was wrong on it too. I recognized that something pretty dramatic was going on in housing, but I actually called it in the annual meeting when I got a question on a bubbleette. Well, that was a terrible term to use. It was a 4-star bubble, and the rating agencies missed it. And you know, as I say, you know, you can look at the March 30th, 2007 report to Congress by OFEO, which had 200 people overseeing Freddie and Fannie, and they basically gave them a green light on asset quality.
Well, I actually think I take a different view that if you look at OFEO's reports, which we've had access to, they raised a number of issues. But moving on from that,